Tom Campbell here. If you find something of significant value in our videos, please consider supporting their production through our Patreon account or through a one-time donation. The links are in the description below. Thank you and enjoy the video.
Okay, I'm going to go on to the next question. Thanks for that. What sorts of interactions could we have or should we have with low entropy, love-based beings from NPMR? This is intuitive communication he's talking about. Could you briefly sketch a range of desirable possibilities from beginning explorer to more advanced?
Well, in general, on the subject of interacting with non-physical beings, don't expect too much there. Some people have the idea, oh, I'll go out and I'll talk to these beings who are so much smarter than I am, and they'll tell me all kinds of wonderful things, and I'll just know all sorts of things, and it'll be great. Well, it's not exactly like that. Remember, the saying I often use is, if it's not your experience, it's not your truth. When somebody else tells you something, that's not your experience, so it's not your truth. Perhaps it was their experience and their truth. Perhaps it wasn't even their truth. They may just be passing something on that somebody told them. And you're getting it secondhand or third hand or fourth hand, hard to say. So that's one thing. Being told things is not as informative as experiencing things. Okay, being told things gives you intellectual information, but it doesn't give you a lot of being level information. Now, you can get some being level learning from things that you're told, that's true, but you have to grasp that opportunity and make it yours. Just listening to it and saying, okay, I'll file that away for future reference, that doesn't help you grow up. So that's one thing to be careful of. Secondly, because you never are sure where this information is coming from, you should always be skeptical of the content, because what you may be getting may not be right, might not be in your best interest, might not be the person that you intended to talk to. People's own minds are usually unsteady enough, in other words, thoughts come and go, that you can have a little thought pass through your mind that'll set up a link and make a connection, and you don't even realize you've done that, just because it's one of those thoughts that pass through your mind, and it's there for a fraction of a second and it's gone. But sometimes that makes the connection because it's there. So if you don't have a quiet mind that's still and only has the thoughts you want it to be there, if your mind's still undisciplined and it's unruly thoughts are in it, it's hard to say what you might end up connecting to with those thoughts. You might have a thought that just flashes through, oh, I hope I don't connect with anything ugly or bad, something that would want to hurt me. If that's only a thought that, not that dominates, but just flashes through your mind for a microsecond, that may be enough just to connect you with that. Or if you get some voice, you say, oh, I want to talk to the big cheese, and you hear this voice says, oh, okay, I'm the big cheese. What would you like to know, Junior? And you say something, some entity may just be playing with you. That may not be the big cheese at all. So how do you know? Well, see, you don't know unless you have enough experience that you can vet it from your own experience. You see? So you know when you're talking to your, let's say, you're talking to your father, you know it's your father. You know his voice, you know his mannerisms, you know the kind of things he says, you know his attitudes, and you can identify your dad pretty easily. You see? But it's not that hard to impersonate your dad. It's not that hard to impersonate somebody. So always remain skeptical. So if you're going to remain skeptical, then what good is this information going to do you? Because you say, well, I got this interesting stuff, but I really don't have any idea exactly where it came from and whether it's right or wrong. You're back to that point of being open-minded, could be right, could be important, and skeptical. Well, I'll have to think about it and see if it's something that I want to take on, if it's something I want to do, if it's a piece of information that's useful to me. See? So that's the thing. Just getting information from the great beyond and thinking that that's going to be a wonderful thing, not so much. So all in all, you'll find that people who can do this very easily generally don't do it a whole lot, other than for special circumstances when they need it. Just drifting around and seeing what you can dig up is usually not such a good idea.
All right, moving on to the next question. If we already have spirit guides in the larger consciousness system, would there be any compatibility issues having your MPMR friends as contacts? I'm wondering if having too many voices or inputs in one's guidance would be more confusing than helpful, or if perhaps it might be an affront to one's own guides or an interference to them to seek and follow additional guidance or input from the non-physical.
If you're worried about your guide's ego being too big, and he might be affronted because of the things you're doing, then you should probably drop him from your connections, because that would not be too reliable. Your guides are basically your own personal interface to the larger consciousness system. And that interface is custom made for you. So it's something or someone, it's an entity that has the attributes that you would trust, that you would feel comfortable with. Okay, something, some entity that is, that you might listen to, not just because of what they told you, because over history of what they have taught you, or the opportunities that they've shown you about growing up. So you get, just like anybody else, if you're sitting on a bench waiting for the bus and somebody comes up and chat with them, well, that's fine, you chat, but it's all at a very superficial level, and you don't really get deeply into your personal life with somebody you don't know. It's the same way with people in the non-physical. Relationships take time to build, and over that time, trust builds, knowing builds. You get to know each other more deeply, and you have to develop the relationship, not just walk on a crowded street and say, hey, you, I'd like to ask you some questions, and then take everything you're told very seriously. You can't do that in the physical. You can't do that in the non-physical. You never know for sure who's talking to you and why. You see, not for sure. With time and experience, you can build trust and you can build knowing. But if it's a new thing, then you tread carefully and get to know each other slowly and do things that allow you to make decisions or judge the quality, the value of this relationship. Is it really valuable to you? Is it only valuable to your ego? Is it only valuable to your beliefs? In other words, you're not really growing up much, but it makes you feel really good. Or it tells you all the things that you already know. Well, that's kind of feels good for your beliefs. So what's its value? That's the thing to judge it by. What's the value of this relationship? And that value is going to get greater the more time and effort you put into that relationship. So it's not just an encyclopedia. It's not a big, wiki in the sky. that you're going to ask questions to. It's not really like that. You're talking to either, some other IUOC, or you're talking to, more likely, the larger consciousness system. That guide's there to help you make good choices, but it won't make good choices for you. It's not going to tell you what to do. And if it does, I'd say be very wary, because legitimate guides in the LCS will not tell you what to do. Again, if you make somebody else's choice, it's not going to help you. It has to be your own choice, so they won't tell you what choice to make. They'll only give you information so you can make the choice yourself.
And Tom, what you've been talking about with these questions we've just had is information in the non-physical, and this being a virtual reality by your theory, everything is information. Now, you are discussing discernment, and I think it's important in these non-physical communications to use this kind of discernment through experience. And we also need to use discernment in our lives on this physical plane as well, in our communications here. This same kind of discernment is just as important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Most of the things are that way. The things, how you approach things here and how you approach things there are very similar. You have to approach from the being level. You have to build relationships. Your questions and your interactions should not be to puff up your ego, just to make you feel good about your beliefs. That's not helpful. And that's true there. That's true here. Sure, all the same things apply.
Thank you, Tom. I'm going to go on with one more question. This stems from one of the YouTube videos we did, The Origins of Consciousness, where a question arose that the larger consciousness system is evolving and continuing to evolve, and it evolved from a primordial being thing, and it had potential for both fear and for love, and that evolution took place over billions of years. Now, one of our videos, Origins of Consciousness, alluded to, and this was conjecture, this is simply looking at it from a consciousness viewpoint of fear and love potential, and one particular thing that was of interest to one of our friends, Eric in Spokane, was that there was, and he is a professor and he's also a director of religious studies, was the Old Testament and New Testament differences in the God that is vengeful in the Old Testament and the New Testament's message of love. Now, the question here is, it is a little bit puzzling to this person that this transition between Old Testament and New Testament happened within a relatively short amount of time in regards to the amount of time it took for the larger consciousness system to evolve. So we're just at the Old Testament point and the New Testament point, however much time in between those two, switched this new way of becoming, this new way of handling things through love and through allowing free will. Can you comment on how that time difference might have happened? This is still conjecture.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. This is a conjecture that tends to make sense, and it fits the data that we have. So it's another model, if you like. It's a model to explain this very big difference between, it's not just the Old Testament, but if you look at indigenous people, and when I say indigenous people, I mean people whose history goes back 10,000 years. These usually are the indigenous people, like the bush people in Australia, or the Maori in New Zealand, or the what we call American Indians, in the United States. These are people who were on that land and had their traditions and had their history for, many thousands of years. They lived there. So that's what I mean by indigenous people. People with deep histories, long histories, not like, oh, the United States culture. Well, that only has about a 250-year, lifespan as far as culture goes and as far as deep history. It's a very shallow history, a lot shallower than most of, than Europe for the most part. But in any case, if you look at the indigenous people and their beliefs and their gods, if you will, their spirits, their religions, you will find that there seem to be, just like with the Israelites, which is basically the Old Testament is talking about the chosen people, and the people of Israel is kind of the center culture that gets talked about a lot. Their God is angry sometimes, jealous, vengeful. If you don't do things right, you get punished. Terrible things that happen are attributed to the God. Now, some of that is just people. When terrible things happen, they want to know why. And because people fear not knowing, when people don't know, but they still want to know why, they just make something up and then they believe it. So that's one part of it. But this is so widespread in so many cultures that we kind of have this sense that people's sense of the deity, of the source, that thing that's bigger than us, was something that was scary, powerful, vengeful, jealous. Sounds like it had a big ego. Just God seems to have a very God-sized ego about, my people need to worship me and need to do this for me and do that for me, or I will turn them into pillars of salt, or I will do something, send them storms and floods and whatever. So if you look at that, and then we get to the Buddha, we get to the New Testament, we get to a lot of other things that are a lot more recent, by recent, say in the last 10,000 years. You get to Krishna. You get the things that are only 5,000 years old, maybe 10 at the most. Well, 10,000 years is just a very short amount of time in the 200,000 years that we've been walking around. 10,000 out of 200,000 is what, 0.5%? So that's 0.5% of the time that we've been here. So that's just not that long ago. And think about how consciousness evolves. So that's really this person's thing. Just 0.5% of time ago, suddenly we have this transition from the angry, jealous God with the big ego to a God of love and caring and support and all that sort of thing. Well, consciousness evolves very slowly. And the beginning is the slowest, because every time you grow up, it makes it a little easier to grow up some more, you see. But when nobody's very grown up, then growing up some is hard to do. But she grows up some, and then that makes it easier. So the growing up accelerates, but it's a very slow process. So it's a curve that's just going up just maybe a little bit, just a little bit going up like that, and then it goes like this. It goes up fast. So you have this long, slow increase, and then it goes quicker. Well, that first, 99 0.5%, we were in this very slow part. There wasn't a whole lot going on there. Much of, there wasn't a lot of growth happening for us. Well, it's the same for the larger conscious system. We are just like it. It's just like us. It's bigger than us. It has more depth and more breadth and whatever, but functionally, a piece of consciousness is a piece of consciousness, and it takes a long time to grow up. And once it starts to grow up, once you get to that part of the curve where it shoots up, it changes very, very quickly. But it doesn't change much for a long, long time. Well, that's the way we work. That's the way the system works. So when the system spent, we talk about years. Years don't really have anything to do with this, but I'll just use that as a metaphor, So for many, many years, it was just in the big chat room. Didn't have this virtual reality. Didn't have avatars being, run by individuated units of consciousness. And the larger consciousness system wasn't growing very quickly then. When it was just a monolith, it wasn't growing very quickly. There were no IUOCs. It just was growing very slowly. Well, it made the IUOCs to help it grow more quickly. Well, that did help, but not as much as it would have hoped, because there's just hardly any choices of any consequence in a big chat room. So for a long, long time, there was very little growth. And then the system says we need some context to our interaction that gives us serious, significant, important choices. We need a context within to make choices that has, significance to us, something that can really help us grow up. So then, how do we get that? Well, the virtual reality provides context. If you're an information system, that's how you provide context. You say, well, here's a virtual reality, here's the rules, and these rules specify every interaction going on. Any little energy change of any sort is specified by these rules. So now you've got the context that's created by the rule set. Now, the ability to grow is a lot greater. There's more challenge, there's more consequences. Our choices make more difference. So at that point, we were still going pretty much on that flat part for the system, for us, for everything. It wasn't until we got that virtual reality that things started to go a lot more quickly. Okay, that curve for the system started to go up a little more quickly. So at first, when it made these IUOCs, it made them with the idea that they would interact in such a way to lower system entropy. That's the whole idea of making them in the first place. Well, they didn't do that very well. They had free will and they went off and did their own thing in their own way. And they weren't particularly making good choices, because their choices were all life and death, find something to eat, take what you need. It's all about me. They were getting very self-centered, very self-focused, because that is where their potential took them. Their potential was open for doing wonderful things and being little people of love, or doing a lot of bad things. Well, the environment that was very harsh, that provided the context, had to be harsh. If it wasn't harsh, you wouldn't be any consequences. You see, that's the whole point. The consequences come with the demanding environment, with that harsh environment. That's what creates the consequences. If everybody came here and this virtual reality was such that we all floated around, played harps on clouds, and nobody had to eat or drink, and everybody just was whatever, then it would have been just like being in a chat room. There would be no consequences, and we wouldn't grow up much. So we get into this reality that evolved, and consequences hit us right between the eyes, and we got extremely self-centered, self-focused. We got mean, we got grabby, we got greedy. We got very interested in control and power and force. And in the beginning, this isn't what the system really had in mind. It was thinking, hey, we can all just interact in very positive, creative ways, and that will help lower the entropy, because the system didn't really know exactly what was going to happen with all these new IUOCs. It just knew that that was the next step in making more possibilities. There's more possibilities to grow into with that step. It probably didn't know exactly what those possibilities were. So it tried in the beginning, I think it seems reasonable to tell those new IUOCs what they should do and how they should do it in order to minimize entropy. But the IUOCs had to have nothing to do with it. So the system got a little pushy, because that's what one does when one's not very grown up yet. When your entropy isn't that low yet, what you do is you get pushy and you get forceful, and you're self-centered yourself. And you say, yeah, but I want it to be this other way, and I'm in charge here. You guys need to do what I say. Oh, you're not doing what I say. All right, yeah, I'm going to turn you into a pillar of salt. I'm going to throw some lightning storms down on you. Straighten up, guys. And you had that kind of thing because the system itself was not very grown up. But it learned over time. Right now, we have 200,000 years here of people. And there were no doubt critters before that, but it's hard to bully critters around because they don't have that large a decision space to easily be bullied. So for those 200,000 years, for most of it, our system, our LCS system, was learning that the optimal way to get the whole to grow was if you interact with it with love and caring, that you don't force, that free will becomes sacred. You don't try to override anybody's free will by telling them what to do. When you start telling people, you do this and you do that, you're taking away their free will. And the system realized that whenever you do that, you get negative results. It doesn't work out well. So someplace along that line, 10,000, 20,000 years ago, I don't know, when this path started to change between the angry, jealous, fearsome gods and the gods of love. But somewhere in that transition, the system figured all that out. And yes, that's not that long ago. You say, good grief, it had all this time, and it's only almost recent history, the last 10, 20,000 years that it figured this out. But that's because this is a very slow going, and then when it figures it out, zoom, it goes very fast. So that to me makes sense in the fact that it didn't grow up itself until 10 or 20,000 years ago. Our time is understandable. It's a long, slow process to figure this out. And it didn't really have the opportunities to grow until it created this virtual reality, until it created an environment in which there were consequences to our choices, serious consequences. Only then did things start to move more quickly, you see, whereas before, everything just kept on keeping on the way it was, and that growth path was almost flat. It hardly grew at all. It's making this virtual reality was the thing that put it in high gear, created consequences. People evolved, de-evolved, came out. What were they? Well, wherever you always start at the beginning. And at the beginning is pretty high entropy. Then you have to develop your potential and grow from there. So all of that time spent in the big chat room didn't create a whole lot of growth because there was nothing pushing growth, you see. So that's why, yes, the system, became a kinder, gentler system, a caring system, a system that knows that to help us, we need little nudges. We don't need to be told what to do or how to do it. Because if it takes our free will away, that's getting in our way from growing up. We can't grow up. We can act better, but we can't actually grow up. We can't be better unless we make our own choices. And having a bunch of people act better because they're afraid not to isn't helpful. You see? So that's why it's not such a surprising idea that all of this growth happened in what we'd call near history, not, 100 million years, or 100,000 years ago, or 1,000,000 years ago, or something. There just wasn't anything pushing the system very hard. It didn't have a lot of meaningful choices either. It was just making new technologies and learning and patterns and patterns and patterns and things that made sense. And it was probably discovering mathematics. It was, creating language so that the IUCs could talk to each other. So, it was busy, had a lot of things to do. It was evolving. It had a lot of evolution to do until it got to the point that it needed to evolve a virtual reality. But see, you can't evolve a virtual reality like on day two, when you're still, only rudimentary consciousness. A consciousness had to have a lot of know-how to come up with the initial conditions and rule set to develop this virtual reality. So it took it a long time. So that's what it was doing. It was becoming smart. It was becoming a good mathematician, a good computer scientist. It was learning how to manipulate data. It had a lot of things to evolve, to do. And only until it evolved that up to this point, to a certain point, could it actually make a virtual reality. Then it made the virtual reality, and then that technology kicked the evolution into high gear. But it took a long, long time to evolve the know-how to simulate a virtual reality. That didn't just come about early on. That came on much, much later. It had to be a very sophisticated information machine first. You see, all that was happening while us IUOCs were, running around in the chat room. And even before that, it was maturing. It was becoming the sophisticated machine. All those patterns of patterns turned into mathematics eventually. So it had a lot of growth to do, a lot of things to figure out.
So that seemingly short period of time really was just the observations of how things worked. It was simply the right timing for this new approach of love and this message of love.
Yeah, and like I say, you hear me say that today, the human species, for the first time in its history, has an ability to go faster on that curve. Okay, well, it's our time now. All the pieces are together. We can do that. Okay, it's possible. Doesn't mean we're going to do it, but it's finally become possible that we can do it. Well, that's the way it was with the system. The system was growing up and becoming and evolving, and eventually it got all the pieces that it needed developed, evolved, that it could make a virtual reality and get out of the big chat room, you see. And when it got to that point, well, that took it off on things started to change more quickly then. It got to a point where it had a new technology to help it evolve. Its first new technology was just regular time. I was way back near the beginning. It was just regular time, so you could sequence things. So that's the way it is. So it had to wait until it had all the pieces ready for it to take the next step. It couldn't have taken that step any earlier. It didn't have the pieces yet. It wasn't capable of making a virtual reality. So it did. It figured it out. Evolution is slow, but it got to the point where that was a possibility, and it did it. And I suspect it took it a long time with millions, billions of trials and errors to come up with the rule set, to make it just so it balanced and was stable for a long time. And that was something that I'm sure took a lot of time. And then it started to log IUOCs, playing these avatars, and that took a long time. But the time base, everything keeps getting faster and faster, you see. So we think we've been slow for the last 200,000 years, but the system itself was very, very slow for the 1 billion or 2 years before that.
Well, we know from ourselves that learning is not, um, it's slow, one thing after another. It's not a leap.
It's not a leap. So that's
Yeah.
why it makes sense that the larger conscious system changed from. I mean, it had to grow up. It didn't just start love. It can't just start as a being of love. That doesn't make any sense. Physics or logic can't support that. It had to be just a primal system that could tell this thing from that thing, and then it evolved from that and evolved from that. This idea of love as the answer had to wait till you had a social system. When it was a monolithic system, that wasn't even in play. There wasn't enough technology there and enough probability there, possibilities to even play that game. Only when we got a lot of IUOCs with free will did it become a social system. Only when it's a social system is love then becomes the answer. It's love and caring and helping and cooperating that creates low entropy. See, before that, that wasn't even a set of possibilities. So it wasn't until we got IUOCs that we had a social system. And then that social system, it took that system a pretty long time to decide that the way you work with that social system is by caring for it, is by loving it, is by preserving the free will of each individual. Absolutely. Not by taking away its free will and telling them what to do. That is dysfunctional. The system had to evolve just like we do. And the path to the evolution is just the same. So we're evolving that same thing. Right now, we're in the control, power, force phase. Right, look around. That's what our life is all about in this world. It's all about control, power, and force. Everybody's trying to manipulate everybody else to be the way they know they should be, to be the way they want them. And that's almost everybody. Parents manipulate their kids, spouses manipulate each other, teachers manipulate the kids manipulate the teachers. And you just go through, employees try to manipulate the boss, and the boss tries to manipulate the employees. Everybody's trying to manipulate each other for their own advantage. Control, power, force. Well, that's where we are. That's where the system was when this virtual reality first started. And it had to grow up through experience, just like we have to grow up through experience. If it's not your experience, it's not your truth. You see, the system couldn't just one day go, oh, I got it, love's the answer, without any experience. It doesn't work that way. You only grow up, it's only yours. It only changes you at the being level, changes your being, who you are, if it comes through your experience. That's how you grow up. So until that system had an environment that offered it that experience, it wasn't becoming love because it was just a monolithic thing. Didn't make any sense. Then when it became a social system, oh, okay, now it started, but it was so slow. And then we got the virtual reality. It got capable enough to do a virtual reality. It got sophisticated. Then it had to see for itself through its own experience that overriding other people's free will, control, power, and force is negative, doesn't work, backfires, does not end up in low entropy. It only ends up in high entropy. And here we are learning the same lesson because we're chunks of consciousness and we're doing exactly what the larger system, which is also a chunk of consciousness, did. And we're doing it slow, just like it was slow. But we have now help. Not only do we have this virtual reality, which gives us lots of opportunities that didn't exist before to speed us up, but we also have a larger system that's been through the process and understands how to help without trying to manipulate our free will, without trying to tell us what to do or how to do it. It has to manipulate in a way that doesn't take away our choices, and I call that nudging. It has to nudge us, give us opportunity, put the right people together at the right time by nudging, doing things like that. And it does that in the background without ever telling us what choices we should make. You see, so That's why all of this comes together near this end rather than at the beginning end. It just wasn't possible at the beginning end. So it's not at all surprising that the last, I'm not a historian, so 20,000 maybe, I don't know, what do we consider modern times? How far back do we go? I guess you go 5,000-10,000 years when you get writing, when people were writing things down. You get written records go back about that far, I think, around 10,000 years. But so maybe it was before that some. So that doesn't matter. That's still like, 0.1% of the whole thing. It's just the last eye blink of humanity that all this happened. It's that long period wasn't very productive.
Well, it's interesting conjecture, but it offers historical, evidential elements, and it is a good, intelligent conjecture as to what happened based on all of these indigenous cultures and these historical records as to why the LCS had observations and insights into what would really work for this new system and how we need to evolve towards love.
I think one of the problems that people have with this is, they often tend to connect the larger consciousness system with God, the idea of God. Well, the big difference between God and the larger consciousness, well, I should say the big difference between most people's viewpoint of God, the typical God idea and the larger conscious system idea, is that God is the supernatural being that is perfect and has always been perfect. That's just God just is, doesn't have any causal source, and it's perfect and it's always been that way. Okay, so that's the God idea. And the larger consciousness system it's not supernatural. It's a natural system. It's consciousness. It started at its simplest state, just knowing a 1 from a 0, just being able to differentiate two states, and evolved from there toward lower entropy as an information system. Consciousness is information. So it's not perfect, and it hasn't been forever. It's not infinite time. It's not infinite perfection. It's not infinite anything. It's not infinite bits in the information system. It's just a real system that is evolving. And why does it evolve? Well, because you either evolve or you de-evolve. Those are the only two choices. If you de-evolve and continue to de-evolve, you're dead. Your information system disappears. It's all random bits, high entropy. So it's just in survival mode like everything else, trying to grow and become. And I think when people get the idea that, the larger conscious system, a lot like God, love and caring and helps us, helps the people grow up, and all of that sounds right, except God is perfect, has always been perfect, and always has existed. Whereas the larger conscious system had to grow up. It started from scratch and had to develop who it was. And it's still developing. It's not done yet. It's not perfect. It's still in the process of evolving. And now we're the slow part. All we IUOCs are the parts that have to get our act together and find out that love is the answer and have intentions along that line.
This fits with the evolutionary process that you speak of. Otherwise, it's simply not a growing, live evolutionary process.
So now that the system's grown up, then our larger conscious system does tend to look a lot like the New Testament God, or Buddha's reality, or all that's kind of modern though. That's like the last that's less than 3,000 years. It's not 10 or 20. That's Buddha's only about 2,500 years old. So that's quite a bit less than 3,000 years ago. Well, that's just a tiny little piece of our history. So it does, larger conscious system does kind of look like the system that the Buddha described. does kind of look like, the New Testament God, if you will. Does sort of look like that. But the two are kind of basically different as far as the perfect forever, infinities, that sort of thing, which requires supernormal to puff out of nowhere, to exist for no reason because it always has been there kind of thing. Well, none of that's logical. And I try to make my model a logical model. So I have to start small and build everything from logic. And that's what my big toe is, right? It's a logical model. So
well, thank you,
yeah,
Tom.
take it or leave it. That's the way it is.
No,
But
it's
the two do
wonderful.
come together very nicely. Now the reality the Buddha describes and the New Testament God that's full of love and caring. God is love is a statement. From Peter or Paul, or Peter and Paul is the same person there. They changed names, but in any case, one of the disciples wrote that down. God is love. So there's obviously a lot of overlap now, but things were different even back in the Old Testament and back with indigenous people. It wasn't like that. It wasn't all about love. It was this scary God that made demands.
Thank you, Tom. That was really an interesting discussion, and highlighted, I think, what her question was all about.
Mm-hmm.
These differences in how the system is evolving and why it switched in apparently such a short time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very
Well,
much.
we're hoping also to switch in an apparently short time.
Yes.
I'm hoping in the next 3 or 4 decades, less than a century, which is now only 1,000th of a percent of our span, that we humans will decide that we can live in peace with each other and care about each other and have a cooperative, caring relationship with not only just other humans, but with all critters on this planet and the planet itself. So, and it's possible now. So we're at that place where we could start going up this curve quickly. I don't think it's going to take us another 10 to 20,000 years, to get there. I think we've been growing and we've been making progress. Look at the go back to the Dark Ages, the 12th century, 10th century, 15th century, and you'll find life was a lot less kind and gentle and supportive back then. It's much, much, much better now in general for most people. Not for everyone, but for most people, it is. And that's because we have indeed grown up. Now, some of that is us acting better. Some of that is us acting better because we've been told we need to act better. But some of it is us being better too. We just are better, kinder, more gentler people now. For all the meanness and all the wars and everything else going on, if we just look at the average person, we are much better off than we were even 1,000 years ago or 500 years ago.
Yes,
Yeah.
that potential is there for
So
all
we're
of us.
growing. So see, we see more growth in the last 500 years than we saw in the 100,000 years before that. So that's just the nature of evolution of consciousness, is that it's very slow until it starts to take off, and then it can take off rather quickly. It's just a matter of changing our attitude. I mean, that's how fast it can take off. It's all we have to do to grow up is just change our attitude. Let go of the fear, let go of the beliefs, and we see life differently. And bingo, there we are. I mean, that doesn't have to take a long time.
Changing perspectives.
Yeah, changing perspectives.
See what works, and we've seen what works and what doesn't work. Somewhat, it's been, uniquely highlighted, I think, in these modern times. And we can see that a kind of gentler way is the way forward.
Yes, indeed. It's the only way forward. The other way is a very high entropy way, and it'll never take us to where we need to go.
Thank you so much, Tom.
You're welcome. Tom Campbell here. I and MBT Events hope you liked this video. We now have well over 1,000 hours of free video on this user-friendly, ad-free YouTube channel. Though these videos are free to our viewers, they represent many thousands of hours in production and editing, and many thousands of dollars invested in video and audio equipment, along with the required computers and software to store and process the raw video into finished products. So far, all of this content has been funded directly out of our own pockets. Be assured, we will always continue to do what we can. It's our life, our purpose, a labor of love that we will continue to pursue as best we can. However, those pockets are not as deep as they used to be. Thus, we are now seeking to augment our resources with support from our viewers. If you find something of significant value in our videos, please consider supporting their production through our newly created Patreon account or through a one-time donation. The links are in the description below. Thank you.